Colorado is the last in the country for investment in infrastructure, access, and quality of care and behavioral health. So we are the last in the country.
Hi, folks. I'm Alex with the Community Project. I'm here with Heidi Grove and Trevor Baringer from the Division of Homeless Systems and Coordinated Response. You guys are a division of Boulder County Housing Department.
Correct.
Yep.
What is it that you guys do?
Our goal is to focus on the homeless response within Boulder County. And with that, we do systems level work on coordinating with our municipalities, so Boulder proper, Longmont, as well as our smaller communities, and working with our nonprofits who are working hard and dedicated in the field, and really boots on the ground of working with our folks who are experiencing homelessness and making sure that, one, that they're all talking to each other, and then also making sure that we're setting up the right resources for the folks that just need that additional assistance.
You're trying to coordinate all the organizations. If anyone has a toe in the pond, so to say, you would like to know who they are and get them involved with a larger effort. Is that correct?
And that's across a continuum of services. So all the way from homeless prevention, so people who are on the verge of losing their housing, all the way to people who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness, to people who are in sheltered homelessness, to people who are sleeping in their cars and their RVs, like all the continuum. So we really kind of look at the how do we keep you housed all the way to how do we get you housed and everything in between.
Exactly.
And circling back around, once you're housed, how do we keep you housed?
How many folks are we talking about in Boulder County?
Experiencing homelessness?
Or are potentially on the verge as well?
Quite a lot. Boulder County is a very expensive place to live. And that's why the commissioners decided to, increase the livable wage last year for the county to try to keep up with those incomes. But there's a lot of communities across Boulder County that they're on the verge. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand that when somebody falls into homelessness, they've exhausted all their resources. People would rather let go of food on the table to keep their rent. So when someone stops paying rent, that's usually the last to go.
Mm-hmm. And not to mention homegrown folks who do live in our community, but then we also have to take in the factors that folks come and visit Boulder County, especially during the summer months when we have folks that prefer to camp in our mountain communities.
So how many organizations do you guys work with? Do you have a count on that?
A lot. The full list is on the HSB, the Homeless Solutions for Boulder County website.
But, so you think there's 30 plus organizations that are working on this problem in Boulder County?
Well, if you talk about other, even county departments, then probably more than that.
Because not only is it our nonprofit works, so we work closely with our shelter partners, All Roads here in Boulder, and then Longmont, we have Hope. But we also have a lot of our outreach teams, focus reentry. And so we not only work with our partners in the nonprofit sector, but we're also working with our folks in the cities. So working really alongside Boulder proper and Longmont, as well as some of our smaller communities.
Like Denderland, Lyons, Louisville, Lafayette.
How is it working with the municipalities? You guys have a good relationship?
Yeah, I think the great part about this work is that everyone has the same guiding principle, the same Northern Light. No one wants folks to be on the streets. No one wants to be experiencing homelessness. And so I think the greatest part is that when working with our partners is that we all have the same guiding principles. Now we can have in-depth conversations on how the best approach it is to resolve it. But again, when we're working with our folks, everyone's that we work with are here for the right reasons.
And I think the one thing that we all agree upon is housing resolves homelessness. And so, the pathways to get there sometimes look a little different, but that is the North Star. That is the ultimate goal. Like, how do we get you housed and how do we keep you housed?
What's a typical route for getting
There
someone?
is no
Okay.
such thing.
All right. All right.
I think the challenge with homelessness is, it is a product of failed systems, not upstream, not individual failures. That said, the journey that someone has experienced to fall into homelessness is very unique to that individual.
What could happen on a governmental level that cause an individual to experience homelessness?
A whole lot.
Okay.
So whether it's individuals, whether it's families, whether it's youth, when you think of, like, if you think about every research study you've ever read about homelessness, they always have like another system that was a predictor of homelessness. So for like youth, foster care involvement is like the number one predictor of falling into homelessness. Child welfare, and like having your children taken away or being involved in child protective services is a predictor with family homelessness. Same with lack of access of workforce opportunities, also a predictor of homelessness. Justice involvement, like think of that one mistake you made, all of a sudden you're in jail, and then you lose your job, and then you lose your apartment, and like it's this domino effect. So justice involvement, losing Medicaid, like healthcare. If you don't have insurance or insurance that can cover expensive bills, that one hospital visit with a $20,000 bill can completely gut your entire life savings and make you actually fall into homelessness. So that all of those different pathways are very unique to the individual, and it's really trying to both look at it from an individual perspective but also a systems perspective simultaneously, and how those interface with each other.
Seems like a lot of our service agencies, from what I have seen, are working on basic needs, and it seems like everyone's always trying to put out a fire, and a lot of people seem kind of tired.
Yeah.
It seems like an exhausting job.
It is an exhausting job. I mean, and you and I were talking about this right before. Our country has not invested in what we know works in resolving homelessness unless we have a world war. And then all of a sudden, like if we think back to after World War I and World War II, we had shanty towns, right? Like there's pictures, it's documented of like Central Park in New York, just not trees, shanty towns. And that's when we actually invested the funds into building housing, building the infrastructure, helping people get jobs, helping people like earn skills that were marketable. We have not invested in that at that scale since that time frame. And then you also have to take into account what happened in the 80s with the deinstitutionalization of the mental health facilities, where we said, and there were two things that happened in parallel. One, we divested in HUD, and then we said, okay, well, we're not going to institutionalize behavioral health anymore. Well, you can't deinstitutionalize and not provide housing at the same time. And so what ended up happening was all these hospitals were told, you have to release these people. And so they literally just opened up the doors and said, see ya. But we didn't have any housing to like catch them as they were exiting. And so what we're seeing today is the impact of the de-investment in all of these things, whether it's housing, whether it's behavioral health. Colorado is the last in the country for investment in infrastructure, access, and quality of care in behavioral health. So we are the last in the country. And so you see housing not meeting what we need. You see behavioral health not meeting the needs that we need. You see child welfare and the disruption of the family, when, there was a huge push back in the 2010s to do kinship care, right? So there was a lot of research that showed that if a family got involved in child welfare, the most important thing was to find someone in their family system that could take them while the parents were working towards reunification. We've moved away from that. And so like all of these things have ripple impacts. And so when we look at what we see on the streets today, it makes logical sense, but you got to look upstream. We talked about this, at the COC, the Continuum of Care convening. The homeless system is literally the last safety net for all these other systems.
Yeah.
So if you were to think about those stuffed animal, those little hammocks, that stuff you put in stuffed animals, if you had a whole bunch of these little hammocks up and those were representative of all the systems and you kept dumping all these stuffed animals, they're going to eventually fall out. And the homeless system is that last safety net. Well, you can't keep dumping into the overflow and not expecting to see the impact without the investment from upstream.
And that safety net has a lot of holes in it.
It does.
It has
Yes.
a lot of holes.
Mm-hmm.
People are falling through that. And where do they go when they fall through that?
That's the question.
Yeah.
Because, it is last resort. To Heidi's point, no one wants to lose their housing. And it's one of those things where we want folks to understand that someone who's experienced homelessness is not character failing. It's not something that they need to be blamed for. It is a lot of different things that have failed. And, our work is dedicated to helping folks and build that foundation so that they can be successful and not only finding housing, but then retaining it.
And I think the other piece too that a lot of people really don't necessarily see is what you see on the streets is a very small percentage of those that are actually experiencing homelessness. Experiencing homelessness is probably one of the most shameful things in society. Like, we're always taught, build yourself up by your bootstraps. If you're not successful, it's your fault. And so that's ingrained in our psyche as a society. And so when people fall into homelessness, it's really hard to there's humility. And a lot of the time our outreach workers, our shelter workers are really spending time saying it's okay to ask for help. Let's get you on a path forward. Let's not think about how you got here, but we'll do that when you get housed so that we can unpack and try to make sure that doesn't happen again. But it's okay to ask for help. And I think that we forget that, right? Like, I know for me, growing up, it was always hard to go to your parents and say, hey, man, I really screwed up. Mm-hmm. There's this and I think that we forget that that's going on with the clients that we see and the people that we see on the streets. And I think the other thing to think about is when we talk about homelessness being a product of failed systems upstream, these folks have been burned by so many systems.
Yeah.
And so you have to really show them that you are different.
Yeah.
Because it takes about, 17 interactions?
17 interactions.
To build trust.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of the folks I've been talking to have expressed a lot of frustration with just simple things, trying to get their ID, birth certificates, which I've been learning that
it's a whole process.
It's a whole process that you have to go through before you can get a job, before you can get housed, before any of the rewards happen. You have to get some of these lower level accomplishments under your belt, I guess.
Yep.
Our outreach workers, majority of their time is getting that documentation.
Yes.
And that's not an easy process either.
No. And especially if you're somebody's like, for me, prime example, if I were to lose my birth certificate, I would be screwed because I was born on a military base. So that's a whole nother layer of trying to track down, because not only do I have to go to North Carolina because I was born in Fort Bragg, but then you have to go through the military system, which is separate from the state system. So, when you have folks that have these kinds of barriers, it becomes really complex and complicated. And even if they had all their documents and say they got their job, if you don't have a bed to put your head on every night and you have a 5 a.m. shift, what happens if you oversleep because you were too busy trying to get some rest, and it's not a safe place to rest? And then you're going to your job. And I know for me, if I don't get 8 hours of sleep at night, I am not functional.
And it seems to be hard. But even though you get the sleep, you have to get up and find a place to shower.
Yes.
Use the restroom. Have your clothes cleaned. and
then if you're tired, and if you're tired, you're probably not in the best mood. And so if, say, you're in a customer service or customer facing position, people, customer service jobs are one of the most thankless jobs. I think we've all been there.
Yeah.
You get to experience that person you've never met's worst day. And so if you're really tired and you're really cranky and you're frustrated and you're in survival mode and you're getting attacked by somebody, you're probably going to respond in a negative way, and then you lose your job. And so then you start all over again.
I've actually talked to a lot of folks that have gotten jobs, and then a week later, they don't have jobs again. And it seems to be a pretty severe recurring experience for them. And I'm not sure what we have for supporting them in that. Do we have a workforce team?
We do. We have Workforce Boulder County. But again, without a stable place to stay, how are you going to maintain that? Like, that's just a reality.
Does Workforce actually help them find jobs? And
they do. There's also training programs that Workforce can help pay for. We also had a partnership with the CLO Foundation. The CLO Foundation, which is based here in Boulder, will actually pay for someone to do they'll pay the scholarship, if you will, for a trade-based skill sets, whether that's carpentry, welding. We even got them to do peer certification, paying for those because you have to go through a 2-week course. So there are opportunities and avenues. And then you also have Bridge House. So the one thing that I think is nice about Bridge House, even though it is a work first model, they provide the housing. So
they have limited beds.
And they have limited beds too. So, and it's the same with like our work with Project Recovery. It is a stable house coupled with treatment. So when we hear people talk about like treatment first or work first, it only is as good as the person's like meeting you there, and they have stability to process those. When you're when you're unpacking addiction and behavioral health, the underlying root cause of that is trauma. And so in order to get down to that base, it's really heavy on your system, both mentally and physically. So without that stability factor, so that you have space to, okay, I just did a lot of really heavy work on myself today. I need to decompress and not like go back to addictions, not go back to all these old habits. That is why there is a foundation. Like if we think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you can't get anywhere up in the pyramid unless you have food in your stomach, because food nourishes your brain, you're hydrated, and you have a safe and stable place to stay, because otherwise you're just in fight or flight mode.
This is why housing first is the art.
Yes.
And you get someone stabilized in an environment where they can decompress, they can feed themselves, they can relax and take time and feel safe, and then move forward with therapies. And
the one thing that we did not do right as a country was we kind of took a housing only approach.
Yeah, housing only. Yeah.
That's the biggest misconception, is folks say that housing first is if we get them to a place, then all their problems are fixed. And in reality, what housing first was meant to be was housing with supports. Get them into a place, because to Heidi's point, if they don't feel safe in their environment, the functionality just plummets. And so get them into a place that they feel safe, secure, but then also have that wraparound support for them. What do they need? Do they need workforce training? Do they need recovery supports, mental health care, things like that? So it's really... So when housing first is the argument, what we're really trying to say is, we're not saying it's the only thing that's going to be the magic wand. It's our first step.
Okay. It's housing and supports. Like, it's not just like housing and good luck. It's housing and progressive engagement. It's ongoing, right? Like when we're talking about a population that has been so damaged by systems over the course of their lifetime, and it takes time to build trust. Like, there is that engagement factor, even post-housing, that really is so critical. And, it's got to be targeted interventions, and also with client-led good discussions. Like just saying, hey, I see that your alcoholism is what caused your homelessness, so I'm going to target that, without the client there. I mean, it's like NA, right? NA and AA. people can go into a meeting all day, but if they're not willing to say, like, my name is Heidi and I'm an alcoholic and I've been sober for X number of years, which is always the standard introduction at a support meeting, then you're not really going to get very far.
Yep. You have to admit you have a problem.
Yes.
And seek help, right?
Yes.
Mhm.
So it doesn't seem like there's much of that happening. It doesn't seem like there's a ton of wraparound services.
It's been probably the least invested, and that's across the country.
Yeah.
So when you look at, like, everybody talks about Finland, right?
Yeah.
Finland is the gold standard.
Yeah. Yep.
But Finland, first, they have a totally different, like, system than us. They have universal health care. They have, government supportive social housing. And so they have a different funding stream, different governmental infrastructure, but they really did say, okay, we're going to invest significantly in affordable housing, but we're also going to come alongside with all of these universal supports from a healthcare and a behavioral health perspective. A lot of people see Finland as like, oh, it happened overnight. They started building affordable housing a decade ago.
Right.
Mhm.
So it's taken them 10 years to get to the place where they're at.
So if we start right now, we can be done in 2035.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe, but not just us, Boulder County. Like, this needs to be a national effort. And so when you ask, like, so Trevor talked about what he does, and my role is really to pull those different systems together and think about how we integrate. And then I also work with our regional partners and our state partners, and then also federal. So really making
And
sure.
international.
And now international too.
Okay.
Canada. So, like, it's a whole societal shift that needs to occur.
What does that look like? What do we have to do as a society to make this work?
We need to say that these things, like investing in behavioral health, investing in affordable housing, investing in systems that actually produce positive outcomes upstream, and then hopefully never downstream, but upstream is really where it's at. Like, we say that, like, here's a prime example. We always say that children's the future, that we should invest in our children. When budget constraints happen, what are the first things to get cut?
The schools.
Yeah. After school programs, the school system, nutrition in the schools. So is it that we really do value that? That's a question.
Yeah.
And the reality is, in simple terms, we're all one bad day from needing these supports. To Heidi's point, I mean, one bad medical accident that your insurance doesn't cover, it can put someone onto the streets, and has. And so when we take a step back and say, this could be me, this could be my family, this could be my situation, and reconcile with that realization, hopefully that can change the mindset of, we do need to invest in these. It's not handouts, it's not enablism, it's, this could be my reality.
And I've actually personally experienced this, and I know Trevor knows this. Right after I had my daughter, I lost my job. And, it's really hard to find a new job with a newborn.
Right.
And so I've actually been on TANF. I've had CCAP. I've been on SNAP, Medicaid. And it is, I got to tell you, walking into that when I talk about humility, walking into that human services building, knowing that I have spent my entire career helping people get on these benefits, and feeling so ashamed that I was in that space now, I feel bad for my tech. Like, I just literally started crying. And so I think that those are the pieces that we need to also, like, realize, to Trevor's point, you are one step away.
Yeah, we really don't have that safety net anymore for anybody. It's getting worse.
It is getting worse.
What do you suspect are the results of this, the new budget that's probably going to get passed?
So
I don't want to think about it.
Just to prepare people for
If homelessness is going to get worse.
Homelessness is very bad right now.
Yeah.
It is getting worse, and it's going to get progressively worse.
And give us a sketch of what that looks like.
Okay, here's a prime example. So during COVID, we had the emergency rental assistance program where we dumped billions of dollars into keeping people housed with like back pay and rental assistance. Nationally, we saw a decline in new people falling into homelessness. Then that went away. And now, ding, 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 we're seeing a huge, significant increase in those that are first time to homeless and new.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
so the proposed budget cuts, can you elaborate a little bit on what programs are going to be cut that will impact not just our unhomed individuals, but
society at large?
Society, yeah.
You want to start with one? I can just keep going down the rabbit hole.
I mean, it's not great. So, one, at the time of us having this conversation, it's not a for sure thing. So, I don't want to put that out there that what we're seeing now is going to be the final product. With that said, the thing that Heidi, our division, are really focusing on is trying to predict the future. And I mean, that is a tough job because it can change rapidly within a 24-hour period. And so looking at what is the proposed budget right now, it's not great because obviously the big conversation is the Medicaid cuts. And Medicaid is a catch-all for a lot of folks.
And SNAP.
And SNAP.
And HUD.
And HUD. So for what's being proposed, so there are cuts to healthcare, food access, things like that. And we're seeing that, okay, if these are being cut, where can we kind of backfill? And we're just not seeing who can cover these resources if these get cut.
So everything that I just talked about from the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, all of that on that base,
on the foundational,
foundational is what's being proposed right now as to be cut. And so that's the stuff that we're thinking through. And to Trevor's point, when I say we never invested in the supportive services, so we were able to go, okay, well, if we're not going to get supportive service dollars from over here, because HUD's been cutting supportive service dollars tied to vouchers over time pretty significantly for the last 10 years. So they're issuing new vouchers, but there's no supportive service dollars. So
how successful is that for people that are
probably not?
Okay, so people are getting into a house. They don't have any systems to help them maintain housing, help them transitional services,
or address how they actually fell into homelessness in the first place. And then there's also no economic mobility.
So we're just putting people into housing and saying good luck.
We're trying not to.
Yeah. So when we're saying these, we're saying it on the broader scale.
Got it.
Here in Boulder County, I mean, with the help of our community partners and with the
peer work that we've been building out to scale across the county.
Mm-hmm. So we are trying to address it at a local level. And so for us, it's we don't want to set people up for failure. Because again, when we talked about how people have ended up in homelessness, they've been burned by systems and we want to stop that cycle. And so for us, it's where is going to be the biggest harm and how can we think smarter and creative, especially in these difficult times, because that's what's going to birth innovation. Because right now, the old systems that we've relied on are starting to crumble.
But one of the things that we used to be able to rely on from the supportive services perspective is things like SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Service Agency. They don't exist anymore. They're now part of Health and Human Services.
And when did that happen?
About just
a couple months ago, right?
I want to say maybe around the same. No, I think it was around the same time that United States Interagency Council was also disbanded.
So about a month.
Yeah, about a month ago.
Okay, yeah.
So we're losing
significant opportunities. One of the other programs that we've worked on from a reentry perspective for those that are justice involved and exiting the jail system into homelessness was the Bureau of Justice Assistance. They're looking at a cut. Department of Justice is looking at a cut. And so a lot of these kind of upstream systems that we'd be like, okay, well, we know that this system produces homelessness. Let's go upstream and build out this. We can't necessarily predict that right now.
Mm-hmm. So if we're losing all this federal money,
Mhm.
how does the state come in to assist?
So I think that a lot of people, Trevor and I always talk about where's the purse? Who holds the purse? And so I think a lot of people think, oh, well, the state's going to save us. Well, they had $1 billion budget shortfall, and a lot of federal money goes directly to the state.
Yep.
And then the state disperses. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand where their money is really coming from. Like, where did the coin purse go? So the federal dollars.
So the federal government has the coin purse and it doles it out to the states.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the state also has its own state taxes that's married with federal taxes that are allocated. And then also Prop 123. So it when you feel the federal cuts, you can only offset that with states so much. So prime example this year. Emergency Solutions Grant Funds is a federal grant fund that comes from HUD that specifically pays for rapid rehousing, emergency shelters, street outreach, and homeless management information systems infrastructure.
Mhm.
So what the state has done, because we got Prop 123 about 2 years ago, so they took the federal dollars.
Sorry, can you tell everyone what Proposition 123 is?
Proposition 123 is a state tax that the voters approved that goes into affordable housing and homelessness. So I think what a lot of people don't understand is 70% of that tax revenue immediately goes to CHAFA, which is the finance system of affordable housing. And then the remainder 30 goes into homeless response. So what happened this year was the federal government cut our allocation of the federal allotment to the state from emergency solutions grants. And then that left us with a $4 million cut just on the federal side. And then Prop 123 tax revenue was down because we were seeing tax revenue down across the board. And so we had a $6.5 million deficit of eligible funding for the entire state for homelessness. And so as a result of that, there was, I think, over, I want to say $50 million in requests for like $6.5 million.
Mhm.
So those are the impacts that we're looking at. So as much as people, we really need to start thinking about where does the money come from and what is that trickle down effect. And, we're really seeing this kind of movement of, the states should take care of things. We've heard that a couple of times from this administration, and we have a $1 billion budget deficit. Like, where are we going to find this money?
Right.
And then that trickles down to the counties, right? So when the states have to, balance a budget bill, they have to pass a balanced budget.
And this is before.
This is before it even, yes.
Before the cuts even happen. Here.
Yes.
Okay. So we're already
feeling it.
We shot ourselves in the foot twice, and now someone's going to come along and finish this off.
So that's kind of what
scary.
it is scary. And, I think that that's where this societal shift is really going to be important. Where do we find our values? What do we say? And so, and how can we kind of offset? But on the flip side, we also know that with tariff and the impacts of tariffs and all of these other things, people are not going to have as much of a disposable income as they used to. So it is the perfect storm. We thought COVID was the perfect storm, but there was federal stimulus dollars to kind of buffer, and we're not seeing that coming down.
And as much as we're talking very negatively and having a scary out forecast, we want to know that this isn't us being negative or pessimistic. It's just we want folks to be informed. We want folks to
be realistic.
And be realistic.
You can't solve the problem if you don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Yeah.
Because we're working hard to see what we can do with what we're given. And for, everyday folks, we want to make sure that they are up to date on current information, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of assumptions that are occurring. And so for what we want to encourage folks is to be educated, is to look at what's being proposed locally, but also statewide and federally.
Do you guys have any sites that we could get to for people to educate themselves? Anything off the top of your head?
I mean, everything's out there publicly, honestly.
Yeah.
You know, when the proposed budget was dropped 2 weeks ago. Does that sound about right?
We've had it for a while. Yeah, I think about 2 weeks ago.
I mean, it's publicly, it's out there. You just have to know where to find it. And so we downloaded it and went through it like line by line. Just because, you know, knowing like people immediately think, oh, a HUD cut's going to impact homelessness. Yeah. And there's all these other things that need to be taken into consideration, like, you know, nutritious meals in the school systems. That was cut. You know, like, and I think it's also worth really looking at where do these things come from, like USDA. USDA is one of the biggest providers of nutritious meals. And that's not just in the school systems, that's Meals on Wheels. That's, you know, a lot of these other different funding streams really kind of go to support these basic needs. And so it's worth, you know, Civics 101. Like, can we get back to Civics 101?
And then as you're reading it, there's so much nuance to it. So you can really see where folks can use it, manipulate it to justify a cut or justify spending. So it is about reading it, but also where can it be utilized either for good or for maliciousness.
And I think the one thing that, like, you know, I presented last week to the Metro Area County Commissioners. So there was only one federal designated organization dedicated to homelessness, literally one. It was the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness. They were responsible for setting strategic priorities on the federal level, leveraging all of the different departments and all the different secretaries to prioritize homeless funding, make sure that they weren't duplicating efforts. And they had a budget of $4 million. And that was it. It was a small staff. It's a staff of 11. And that just got disbanded. And so they were literally the TAs for us. So like if we were grappling with, you know, hey, we're seeing this emerging trend in our data, like, do you have any idea of what's going on? Do you have a connection with somebody across the country that maybe has seen this too and they're piloting something we could learn from? Prime example, before they were disbanded, they connected us with Austin, Texas, who has leveraged using housing choice vouchers for 8 alternate dwelling units.
Okay.
So we're meeting with Austin next week to see like how they did that.
Would that be tiny homes?
Yeah, tiny homes or like, you know, cottages, like backyard cottages, like those kinds of things, you know. So they took that to build more density and increase more housing stock, but leverage the avenue of using housing choice vouchers to subsidize those. So if we hadn't had a usage, we would have known that that was happening in Austin.
Right. So it does seem like we, as a community, we have the power to make some changes here of how we address these issues, maybe change some regulations and zoning and get something that might be workable.
Yeah, we have that. And then we also, you know, really educating yourself on what like affordable housing is. I think that there's, you know, I think when people hear the word affordable housing, they think of Cabrini Green, Chicago, or Skid Row, Los Angeles, like these huge, like, I mean, after, you know, my family moved stateside, we're military, we lived in DC. Like, I know what those tower projects look like. I grew up near them. And so I think people think of that and they think that that brings crime and all of these other things. And that is not affordable housing. Affordable housing looks like a me. It looks like a Trevor, like, you know, workforce housing. We work for government. Believe it or not, we don't make a ton of money. And so especially in a market like Boulder County, affordable housing is where a lot of the staff that we even work for the county actually reside in.
What can we do specifically? Do you guys have some ideas about how we can handle this situation? I know you're coordinating with everybody and you know everybody here. So what can we do as a community to maybe change some of the laws and get some different actions in place?
I would say first and foremost, educate yourself.
Yeah.
Like educate yourself. And, I've always, Trevor knows this. I always challenge us to think about policy from a 360 lens, because there's so many times that we put policies in place and we don't think about the unintended consequences. And then we're like, oops, sorry. But we should be like, as we're drafting policy, think about, okay, who could this negatively impact? And so if you're like, this could negatively impact, at least you're doing it with intent as opposed to not.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say start there.
Can we change how the housing vouchers are utilized? Is that something we could?
It depends
potentially
on
do?
the funding stream. So this is where it gets really complicated, right? Like who holds the purse? So if it's HUD, then that's a congressional act. We also have locally funded vouchers where we do have say, right? Because local tax dollars allow the local funding stream to dictate how they prioritize and leverage those. And then there's also state housing vouchers that come out of state taxes. And there's way more flexibility in those kind of state level and below funding streams than there is federal.
Okay.
But, there are, I think the other piece too, the reason why we were so excited to connect with Austin is they were able to get a HUD waiver, a federal waiver to approve this.
Oh, wow.
So I have a copy of their approved waiver. So we have like a proof of concept that they supported this. And so, we're constantly looking for like where other people have done things well. And if they have literally burner boilerplates that we can look at and adapt to our local community needs.
It seems like we do need to make this a national emergency.
We did after World War I and World War II.
Yeah. So maybe we can do it without a war.
Maybe. I mean, that would be lovely.
But yeah, I think folks just need to educate and figure out where their values are and support our nonprofits and folks that are doing the work and again, have their voices heard as far as what they believe is the right thing to do, especially when addressing the homelessness situation. Our big thing is we are doing what we can with the resources at hand, but at the same time as folks are struggling.
And I will say, I've always said this, like, the staff that are in this work are like the most unsung heroes.
Mm-hmm.
The work that they put in, the blood, the sweat, the tears, sometimes literally blood, sweat, and tears, is so inspiring. And, I think about our street outreach workers that when it's negative 10 degrees out there, they are out there like duct taped with hot hands in their core so they don't freeze to death, going out and making sure that they can find people. Or the folks that work at the shelters, like working in a shelter. I've done it. Trevor's done it. It is not for the faint of heart.
No.
It's not for the faint of heart. And dealing with somebody that is having a psychotic episode, that is also not for the faint of the heart. It's a lot of patience and it's a lot of like on the fly thinking. And, so I know that people get really upset when they see, someone experiencing homelessness on the streets and think that there's not people doing work out there. They're working their butts off.
And there doesn't seem to be enough money to have enough people.
No, I mean, and capacity has always been an issue in the homeless system. I mean, even capacity for me was an issue up until recently. Up until a year and a half ago, all the stuff that we're talking about was just me. And so now we have Sonara and we have Trevor, and that increase in capacity has been significant. Mm-hmm. And so that gives us space to think strategically. That gives us space to talk to like other communities that are doing really innovative things and seeing where we can adapt and adjust. I think that so many people read things like, oh, Finland solved homelessness. And they don't think about like, is that adaptable to our current environment? So we can read things that are working great, but it needs to be adapted to the local like nuance and the local policies and zoning and all of those things.
And that's the realism of it. There's no magic wand. There's not, we haven't found the answer yet. It is a multiple choice answer and there's multiple answers. It is complex. It is integrated. It is something that is very nuanced, and it's case by case. And yes, we can look at the data and we can pick apart kind of where our trends are happening and things like that. But people are complicated, and it truly takes a village to really solve or at least find a resolution to someone's homelessness.
Everyone's an individual, right?
Absolutely.
And the path can't, I'm sure it's similar for a lot of people, but it's probably never the same.
And it's not linear either. I mean, you could have, like, I started out my career in street outreach. Like, I would do outreach, and like, this is before Housing First was a thing. And we finally got like someone housed. And then like 2 weeks later, they got evicted because they invited all their friends over, and that was a big no-no. And then they ended back up on the streets, and then they didn't want to go back to the shelter because the shelter was bad. So then they went to like unsheltered homelessness. Like, literally, I worked with a little core group of folks. Like, there was about 10 of them that lived in a train car. And so this was back when squats were a thing. And so like they would, decide to disengage, and then they would re-engage, and then they would disengage, and then they would re-engage, and then they'd be like, okay, I'm re-engaging. I'll try to stay the shelter. And then they would stay at the shelter, and they'd be like, nope, that's horrible. And like, it's not a linear pathway forward.
Right. And that every time someone makes that transition, that's resources that are being used to help the individual that it might take 17 times to engage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of resources.
It is a lot of resources, but would you rather have that engagement and get them back on the path towards housing, and then they're housed and then you don't see them? Or would you rather like not have those resources and there's no one engaging? Mm-hmm. I mean, those are the questions that we have to ask ourselves.
Yep. And it's not an easy fix. It is not an easy fix. And I think it probably is a national crisis at this point.
It is.
We have a housing crisis. We have a homeless crisis, and we have now an economic crisis probably happening around us. And the combination of those three things happening for their homeless population, and probably the other vulnerable communities in our
that are on the brink.
On the brink.
The ones that just takes that one lost paycheck that boop, they're like all the way in, and then you can't undo that.
So we're potentially looking at a lot more people on the streets.
We are.
Without a system that's currently able to take care of the people that are there.
Let alone if you our biggest challenge, we've had as a community some pretty significant successes with, housing resolution. Mm-hmm. Our challenge is the inflow. We cannot house the same amount, if not more than, the number of people that are falling into homelessness every day.
Right.
And so it's like, if you think about the scales of justice, right? Like if you think about that statute, like we're kind of doing this number.
And I know a lot of the solution folks come up with is we'll build more places, but if we're truly dedicated to housing with supports, our permanent supportive housing facilities, that's not just build a building and call it good. It is, you need the zoning, you need the developer that's willing to invest and put their name and their liability online for it. Then you need someone who wants to run it, and that's additional staff, and that's additional trainings, and that's additional, again, funding. So it's not as simple as build more supportive housing complexes. It's, well, who's going to take on that project and who's going to run it? And
who's going to provide the supports to make it supportive?
The wraparound services.
Yes.
Yeah. There was an argument, and I don't think it's true, but the argument was if we solved homelessness in Boulder County, then the influx would be greater.
That's a good question, and it's a philosophical, but there's some evidence in the data. One of the things that I'm most concerned about is, we've made great strides across the region, right? Up until, about 10 years ago, the only shelters were really in the city and county of Denver and Boulder, like for the entire metro area. And, we've made some great efforts in partnership with Metro Denver Homeless Initiative and the Metro Area County Commissioners to build out like MEs, if you will, like homeless leads for each county across the 7. And that capacity has really provided some additional resources and supports coupled with like the ARPA funding. Last winter was the first time, and I've been doing this since literally 2000. I was 20 years old. Last winter was the first time in my entire career that I remember every single county had an emergency shelter for critical weather.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
That was a big deal.
That was a huge deal. And I know
Okay,
you know what
that's a
I'm
step
talking
forward.
about. But here's my concern. Most of those are ARPA funded. That's one-time funding.
Yeah.
So where is the sustainability? And if we cannot find the sustainability, are we going to go back 10 years ago where the only two shelters are located in the city and county of Denver and in Boulder? And, people in crisis go where their needs can be met. That's just a reality.
And if we really take a microscope to that argument and the fact that the worry is folks are going to come here if we have a robust homeless system, but a robust homeless system incorporates reunification and diversion. So if we are truly looking at the individual, truly looking at their case and their causation for homelessness, it may not be a case of lack of housing. It's they don't have the social support here. And so how can we reconnect them with their social support that might be outside of Boulder and have that as a solution? So if we are truly going to be the standard for a homeless response, that doesn't just include housing. It's what caused the homelessness episode and what is the proper solution and support for it. So it's not just finding housing for folks coming into our system. It's what's going to be the best one to keep them housed and for that longevity.
And I will say that, Denver has really stepped up a lot of their homeless response recently. And we have seen a significant decline in those that said that they fell into homelessness from the city and county of Denver coming to Boulder County for resources. Because when you provide those resources in the local community, like people stay where they have connections, where they have a sense of community. That is a reality. Like you're not going to pick up and leave your safety net, even if it's not a functional safety net. Like we are human beings who are relational creatures. And so when people leave the community, it's because they've either completely severed all of those safety net relationships or it's just not available within their own community.
So I guess what I'm hearing is that could legitimately be happening. People are coming here because we have better services.
Maybe, but it's individualized, right? Like, there are some folks that say that, I was in Denver and, the place I was at was super violent and I didn't feel safe. And so I came to where I would feel safe. It is also individualized too. And then there's also people who are like, you know what? Boulder is beautiful. Boulder's beautiful. I would love nothing more. I mean, in the justice world, folks joke that like getting arrested and going to the Boulder County Jail is like a hotel because they have like the flat irons like in front of their window in the pod every day. Like Boulder is a beautiful community. And I think that that's something also. So it's so individualized. It could be resource seeking. It could be escaping violence. It could be, safety reasons. A lot of domestic violence survivors, like they're going to go not where it's in their community because that's where their perpetrator is. And so it's so just like falling into homelessness is so individualized. The reasons coming to Boulder County are also individualized.
Well, thank you guys. I think we got to finish up here. I think you got to go.
I do.
Busy.
Yeah. Anything that you'd like to tell the audience? You've told the audience a lot. We thank you for that. But is there anything in particular that I didn't ask you that you'd like to get across?
I would just say, Trevor and I are open to have a conversation with anybody. I know that you have personally experienced that. Feel free to reach out to us. We are happy to answer questions. I think that, we hear these debates about treatment first, work first, housing first, whatever else first. And our answer is yes, please, because it's so individualized. Like, could a work first model work? Sure, for some populations. Could a treatment first model work? Sure, for some populations. Could a housing first? Sure, for some populations. Like rapid rehousing works great for some people. Permanent supportive housing works great for some people. Like, yes, please to all the above.
Yeah. So it sounds like a person first.
Person
first.
Yeah. And I know that we talked on some heavy topics during the conversation. And again, it's not to have folks afraid or to start scrambling to go to their bunkers, but it is about being mindful and being aware of what the reality is. And we are here for our community. We're here for our neighbors who are struggling. And just as hopefully the folks understand from this conversation, homelessness is not a singular issue. It is complicated. And although there may not be a visual that work is being done around it, but
there's a lot of work.
There's a lot of work around it.
And I will also say, please know we're paying attention.
Yeah.
We're paying attention on what is going on the federal level, the state level, the regional level, the local level. And we're also supporting our nonprofits and making sure that they're up to speed too, so that they can think and pivot accordingly.
And then huge shout out, if it wasn't evident earlier, huge shout out to our frontline workers. I mean, we can't do the work we're doing if it wasn't for them. So all of our outreach workers, all of our shelter workers, everyone who is
case managing and supportive housing,
they deserve all the respect and gratitude, because I mean, this is not easy work. It is not for everyone. And for them to come in every day and to support our folks, I can't commend them high enough.
Yeah. Hear, hear. Well, thank you guys. And thanks to all the workers out there, frontline workers. And thank you guys. And we'll talk to you later on. Thank you.